is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Derry Girls, Season 2, Episode 4. In this episode, the whole family starts off at a wedding, and then we end up at a funeral, and I think this might be my very favorite episode of this show so far. I haven't put my finger on why as of yet, but maybe once I've talked about it for a minute, I'll understand. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. Melanie is in the chat here, and she says, big shout out to Ashleigh. Thanks for commissioning this series. Yes, I believe Ashleigh was also solely responsible for the commission of the first season. And thank you, Ashleigh. Thank you so much for having me watch this show, which I really had not heard much about, and I don't think I would have watched if it hadn't been for somebody commissioning it, and how much I would have been missing out on, truly. Guys, this episode, like I said, it's hard for me to put my finger on precisely why I love this one so much. I kind of think that it might be because the opening of the episode, and by opening, I mean first full 10 minutes almost, maybe even longer, is all the adults. And that's not to say that I don't love the young girls and their acting and their comedy and their, what they get up to. But there is something specific about the adult cast in this that brings their own brand of just being so over it and so tired that really serves as a gorgeous counterpoint to the young cluelessness of the high school girls. And they often serve as sort of a background, they are there to be that foil most of the time to the young girls and to point out to us how ridiculous what they are getting excited about or getting too invested in really looks to the adults. But I like the fact that then there are moments like this in which we get to see what matters to them in a big way played out for a little bit longer. It's not just a one-off joke. It's a real look at their lives. And oftentimes that is done in such a way as to underline how much the adults also care about silly shit, that they may look down on the girls, but they are in their own way caught up in stuff that's just as petty and just as inconsequential. But this one, it's something that feels a lot more like high stakes, and that is family, reputation in the town you live in, and the overall trauma might be too strong a word, but it also might not be. The overall trauma of having terrible people in your family that you've just had to learn to cope with. And when I say that your reputation in the town you live in is high stakes, it is very easy to sort of eye roll that, but it really is, when you live in a small community, what people think of you, unfortunately, affects every single aspect of your everyday life. And there's just no getting away from that. So the way that people see them is, it's serious. It matters. So this all winds up being really, it adds up to this great series of weird judgment calls people are making, decisions. It's all right. So let's get it started, because we start off at this wedding. And there is a priest who is raising his hands in welcome as the bride comes down the aisle. And then Sarah comes around the corner and begins to walk down the aisle. And I was like talking to Owen, we're watching this together, and I'm like, what, is Sarah marrying the Gums guy? What is going on here? And then you see the other woman, who is the actual bride, come out behind her. Because Sarah is wearing a white gown, a white fur stole, white pearls. She's got almost a tiara in her hair and looks 100% like the bride. And not only does she look like a bride, she looks like way better than the actual bride does. I don't know if y'all noticed that, and I can't help but imagine that that is part of the point. But yeah, Sarah is lovely, and this bride looks like a goddamn mess. I don't know who did her hair or her makeup or whatever, but yeah, she kind of looks like a disaster. And it took me a minute, even so, to understand what the fuck is going on. But Sarah steps into the pew with Mary and says, Jesus, but that taxi took forever, so it did. And her entire family is staring at her like, what the fuck, lady? As the bride passes her and stares at her, and Sarah, in her good-hearted, completely unaware way, just says, ah, isn't she gorgeous? And I love that she's just like, despite the fact that she has completely ruined this moment for this woman, she's still like rooting for her because she doesn't even realize what she did. And I sort of like admire that. This isn't about, there's a moment in The Office where I can't remember her name. What is the name of the woman who had the other show? And it's not a spin-off show, but she had her own whole other show. And she's the Indian one who dated, what's his face? But she shows up to Phyllis's wedding in white. And somebody is like, you were not supposed to wear white to a wedding. And she says there was an emergency. And later on, when she's speaking to the camera, she says, I look really good in white. And that's not what's happening here with Sarah. She didn't wear white knowing that this was a terrible thing to do and just doing it anyway. She is genuinely unaware from this moment on as to why everybody is like talking shit about her. She doesn't even recognize it as talking shit. At a later point, somebody says, everybody keeps talking about your damn dress. And she takes that as a compliment and is like very proud of herself that everybody's talking about her. So yeah, there's something about how Sarah is just a disaster here, but also like it is so in like a kind of a well-meaning way. And I can't be mad at her for it as much as I like want to be. And when we cut to after like the brief credits, the poor bride is sitting and like crying with her bridesmaids, and everybody is waiting for Sarah to figure out why the fuck she's upset and why everyone's looking at her. And she assumes that they're all looking at Mary and that it's her hat. It is a bit much, Mary. I did try to tell you. Oh my God. And one of them comes up and says, you should be ashamed of yourself, but directs it very vaguely at Sarah, in a way that could be taken to be at Mary, really. And at this point, Jerry just like looks at Sarah and says something about, how about the woman in the full-length white frock who just managed to upstage the actual bride? And then comes this moment where I'm like, does she know? Because she sort of smirks and she says, I wouldn't say I upstaged her now, Jerry. And takes it as a compliment, what he's saying. But I still don't really think she does get it. I don't think she does. I don't know, guys. Maybe I'm giving Sarah too much credit because I just love her so much. But yeah, she keeps on like getting on to Mary that she should get the hat gone. And I love fucking Cormac coming up. His name is Cormac, right? The guy who just like talks forever about nothing. This dude winds up being one of the best parts of this episode. I love it so much. He is normally just played for this one particular type of joke, but then it turns into a whole other thing by the end of the episode, and it takes a while to pay off. But when it does, I was so delighted by it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I love the moment where he's like going on and on about the people that he's talking to and the people that he has seen. And Mary says something like, can you stop talking? And he's like, yeah, sure. Why? What's going on? And she's like, no reason. I just really needed you to stop talking. And he says, well, fair enough. Like, he just isn't even offended, you know? And probably he has gotten this his entire life, but yeah. So he says, and he's talking about this one wedding he was at the cathedral last week. The wind could have cut you in two. Fierce it was. And now I don't mind a bit of a breeze. And if anything, I prefer it. But that one was aggressive. And I says to myself, says I, Colm, this is no day for ado. And as it turns out, and this is when she stops him, and I wish so much that she had let him keep going, because as it turns out, he's getting to a really hilarious thing. But we'll get to it. So yeah, poor Mary is just struggling with everybody fucking staring. She's extremely embarrassed. And then it turns out that the sister of their mother, an aunt, is here at this wedding, and that she is terrible. And really, it's one thing, like, her name is Bridie. Bridie is, I expected her to just be kind of overbearing in general, but she is so much worse than I anticipated. Like, some of the stuff that she says later, the way that Mary winds up reacting, I'm like 100% behind her, wholeheartedly cheering her on, because this old biddy really did need to die. Like, there are some people that feel like they are fueled by 100% pure spite, and this is one of those people. So, or not Bridie. Bridie? Did I say Bridie the first time? Well, yeah. So Bridie comes up. I love that Grandpa tries to, like, be polite to her for a moment, and it's just like asking her if she's all right. And she says, no, I'm not actually. Not that you give a shit. And here comes her son, who is awful, talking about how she hasn't been doing too well lately, which winds up actually really mattering a little bit later. And she starts in right away with, Christ knows what our Marie ever saw in you. God rest her soul. And it seems like she's just going to go after him, because she immediately launches into, I bet you girls miss her so much, don't you? And I'm thinking, oh, okay. So she's kind of doing to Joe what Joe does to Jerry all the time. And if that's all it was, I would have found it deeply amusing. But no, after she says, you must miss her, and they agree, she says, isn't it a crying shame that neither one of you got her looks? And I love the fact that Mary, when she hears this, immediately looks like, are you fucking serious right now? But Sarah just kind of stares at her and nods, like, almost like privately she's thinking, yeah, it is a bit of a shame. Like, there are times where I really can't decide what Sarah's thinking. She gets angry at such weird stuff, and then stuff that you'd think she'd get angry about rolls right off her like water off a duck's back. So I don't know. So Mary's asking Eamon whether or not he's seeing anybody, how things are going with him. And his mother chimes in here. Eamon will never marry. And Jerry says, is that a feeling or an instruction? And she just fucking stares at him with this intensity that makes everybody sort of like clam up. So then we go to the reception. And it turns out that all of the girls, even though they apparently do not know the bride and groom, were invited. So Orla and Aaron are there because they are related to people who were invited to the actual ceremony. But here we have James and Michelle and Claire all running in. And when Mary expresses some frustration at the fact that she told Aaron she could invite one friend, Aaron just kind of is like, Ma, I don't know what kind of dum-dum you are, but we're a package deal. Like, everybody always comes together. I don't really know what to tell you. And I have to say, it's not like, at this point in the reception, it seems as if there's no dinner being served. So even though normally I'm somebody who, listen, guys, I'm throwing a wedding, right? I already am realizing that, like, dealing with issues like plus ones is going to significantly increase the guest count, and that this is going to be potentially like more expensive than we anticipated due to this. But I also like understand that there are people who are a lot more like the more the merrier will make it work. The thing is that if you have a caterer, you can't just be like, oh, we think this many people, but who knows? And just hope for like anybody to show up. You have to be sure on your numbers. That's clearly not the kind of wedding this is. So normally I would just be like, oh my God, they invited people that were not invited. This is super, super rude. And I would be so mad if I was the bride. And I probably would still be a little annoyed. But the fact that it seems like it's a very low key, like everybody's standing around drinking. I don't see any food of any kind. It just seems as if it really doesn't matter who shows because everything is so casual here, you know? So at this point, her mother walks away and says something about not getting into any trouble. And here comes Michelle immediately as Mary leaves going, so does anybody want to do some cocaine? And this turns into an ongoing thing with Michelle for the rest of this episode, is her determination to try everything in life and her frustration with the fact that her friends appear very uninterested in this, or even outright, like Claire sort of implies that if Michelle does this, she will tell on her. She doesn't say that. But it's the sort of thing where Claire is just such a scaredy cat and so like intimidated by authority that I could see somebody barely having to press her and she would immediately blurt out, she's high on blow. You know, like I am Claire in a lot of ways. I tend to have a lot of anxiety. I do have like this ingrained respect for authority that I don't think I realized I had until later in life when I started to meet other people and realized like I'm the person that I get something that I have to assemble. The instructions are with it. The people who sent the instructions know how to put the thing together. They built it. Of course I'm going to read the instructions. I'm not a fucking moron. There's a sign posted there that says, please don't stand here. I'm sure they posted it because somebody stood there and a bad thing happened. So no, I'm not going to stand there. Very basic shit like that, which as I have grown up, I have started to learn people just think that signs like this or instructions are just there as like a suggestion. And then they get surprised when shit doesn't work out super well for them. And I don't get that. I don't understand not just following instructions of people who, for the most part, tend to have your best interest at heart. And by your best interest, what I mean is they are trying to keep everything moving efficiently and smoothly, and they are instructing you in the best way to make that happen. Not necessarily that they care about you as a person. And most of the time, I know that they don't care about me as a person, and all I'm really interested in is getting something done efficiently and easily And I'm going to go along with things because of that. And I was definitely like Claire when it came to the suggestion of doing drugs when I was her age. Not here for it at all. There was a party that I went to after I graduated where everybody started smoking weed. Some people were even smoking hash. Everybody was getting drunk. And, we were like 18, and it was honestly in a pretty safe location. It was somebody's home, and it was like, it was somewhere that if you're going to have a bunch of kids getting high and drunk, it was probably better for them than to be doing it somewhere out where then they're going to try and drive home. It was a big enough place that everybody could kind of crash after. But I was so deeply uncomfortable with the direction that the party was going, I walked back to the hotel room with my parents and I just was not at all interested in hanging out with everybody when they were starting to because I wasn't planning on getting drunk. I wasn't planning on getting stoned. And there is nothing more annoying than drunk and stoned people when you yourself are sober. They are the worst. So I really identify with Claire here. Now, as an adult with terrible anxiety, I'm starting to see the benefits of marijuana and the fact that it calms me in a way that literally nothing else has managed to do. And I really appreciate CBD being legal because that shit works, my friends. Listen, if you live somewhere where you're yeah, I've tried weed before and it really did help relax me, but it's illegal. It's hard to get. I don't even know who I would go to and I'm afraid about it. May I recommend to you CBD capsules, which I have purchased on Amazon. Now I get it directly from the R&R Medicinals manufacturer. You can take just enough to be less anxious, or you can take a little extra and get a bit stoned, and it's just lovely. And because they're in capsules, you know exactly how high you're going to get, and you know exactly what you're getting every time, and it's just so much easier. And so Claire, I bet, is one day gonna grow up to be a little bit more like me, where she's going to realize the benefits of some of this stuff and be like, all right, maybe I can employ this in a way that will help me out in the long term. But at the moment, Claire is just like, what, are you fucking kidding me? You could ruin our lives. You could ruin your life. Why are you not more worried about this? And that is 1,000% what my perspective was like. My parents both did drugs when I was younger. My father OD'd in front of me like he was a mess. And I just had this association with drugs as being this complete out of control roller coaster that will ruin your life before you even have time to realize it's happening, which in a lot of cases is probably true. And I think it was for the best that I didn't wind up finding drugs and using them early in life, because I think that I have probably got an addictive personality and the gene for addiction in me, and that would have gone really, really badly for me. But I do think that I didn't need to be as terrified of it as I was at the time. And Claire has this reaction of just pure terror. She cannot believe what Michelle is saying. She cannot believe that she's talking about it so openly at this event with surrounded by adults is clearly part of it as well. The whole idea of anybody even hearing them talk about it is just as bad nearly as being caught doing it. And I just sympathize with her so much. Claire is so annoying so much of the time. I really she is, but God, do I relate. I really do. Drugs are for mugs, folks. To which Michelle says, wow, Claire, that might be the dickiest sentence that anyone's ever said. Oh, I love them. So Michelle is talking about how they can get drugs from this guy she knows, Maka. And the fact that nobody knows who the fuck she's talking about. She just keeps repeating his name louder and louder. And they're all like, yeah, we don't know what you're talking about, Michelle. I'm sorry. And she explains who he is, and he sounds really fucking shady. And eventually, she just decides to go ahead and do this on her own. She is going to find this guy and get the drugs and make fucking scones out of them, because that's the only recipe that her mother had in the house, which is so funny. Guys, I cannot imagine how bad those must taste. Everybody, like, seems to eat them with no ability to discern the weed taste. I find that so unlikely. That's part of why people choose to make them in brownies, is because the, like, bitter chocolate flavor helps to mask the intense flavor of weed in them. But for the sake of the show, we're going with it. So all of a sudden, the entire atmosphere of the party changes because the DJ starts playing Rock the Boat. Now, guys, I'm going to need y'all to help me out here. I don't think I ever went to a wedding at this age, or if I did, I don't think I ever experienced Rock the Boat, and I never saw this dance that they wind up doing. And this is like, clearly it's an organized dance that everybody knows, and they all freak out when the song starts playing and like run to the dance floor. So they're trying to get in a line. And we find out a little bit later that Eamon was trying to get into the line and kept being shoved out, and nobody wanted to let him in. But there's like this whole thing where you're like sitting on the floor and doing this like boat rocking thing. It's a weird dance. I do not understand it. It's not even like, does it count as a dance if you're literally sitting on the floor for the whole thing? I don't understand. And during this, Claire is still like yelling at Michelle for considering doing drugs. And she says something about how in this country you can lose your kneecaps for doing them. What is she talking about, guys? What does that mean? That sounds real scary. I don't like the sound of this. And then Claire's like, and I like my kneecaps, Michelle. And I'm like, yeah, again, I'm on Claire's side here. And as she says, I like my kneecaps. They suit my knees. Orla says, you do have cracking kneecaps, Claire. Oh, Orla. She's always there for a weird compliment when you need one. So we see all of Aaron's family sitting at the table, smiling and laughing at them all doing this dance on the floor. There is this pan of the camera over to whom I believe is the groom, who's fucking talking to Cormac and just like nodding with this expression on his face like, oh God, yep. And they offer to go over and save him. And Joe says, no chance. Oh no, not Cormac. That's it. Colm. Thank God. I could not remember. And I love the way that Sarah says, like, Dad, come on. He's only young. Like, she's talking about a man who's about to go to his death, you know? And Joe says, I don't care. When it comes to our Colm, it's every man for himself. So they're all on the dance floor doing this dance. And here comes Bridie stomping over with her son because he wanted to be part of this song. And he's been waiting all night for it. But your girls pushed him out of the line, and now he has a bruise. Show them your bruise, Eamon. This guy. So yeah, he has a bruise on his leg. And they're all just sort of like, dude, are you serious? And Mary says, I'm sorry about that, Eamon. And Bridie's like, basically what Bridie says is, aren't you going to take your girls out of that line and whip them with your belt right the fuck now? Like, that's clearly what she's sort of driving at here. And Mary is just like, our girls are 16. Eamon's a 50-year-old man. You know, the fact that he really wanted to be in this dance is kind of sad and on him. Like, just relax. And then Bridie starts to go in on the fact that they are bad parents. It explains a few things. A bit of discipline would do those girls no harm. They've been running about all day like a couple of wild animals. But then the apple never did fall far from the tree. You girls never did know how to conduct yourselves. Nothing but a pair of hellions. Which, looking at Sarah and Mary, is just such an impossible thing to imagine. Now, I'm sure at one time it was true. Everybody grows up. Everybody gets a little bit more sedate. As much as they may try and fight that, it does just start to happen. But the implication here is so hilarious when you look at fucking Mary sitting there with her feathered hair and her very careful conservative outfit. And Joe chimes in, not that they need you to defend them, you giant pair of knickers. It wasn't my poor sister's fault. She says, it wasn't my poor sister's fault, but you're your father's daughters, all right. And Mary is really starting to get irritated until finally Bridie starts to go with, you two were a huge disappointment to her. You know that, right? And this is really where she's crossing the fucking line. Like, when she said that, even I was like, like, it is one thing to imply that somebody wasn't good enough for somebody else. It's another thing to be like speaking for the dead and saying that this person never really loved you because you guys weren't really that great about her own fucking children. Like, this is just insanely insulting. And Joe stands up, but Mary tells him not to dignify it with a response. And he does hold his tongue, but Bridie keeps talking. If your mother saw the hat, she'd be turning in her grave, for it's nothing but a bloody eyesore. And she really got to a sore spot here for Mary, who says, drop dead, you spiteful old hag. And Bridie sort of like gets this sneer, like she's about to really talk back. And all of a sudden, her eyes like sort of roll back in her head, and she just falls back. And we cut from her on the floor in this gymnasium, I guess it is, for this wedding, to Mary sitting at the kitchen table at home in her sweater, looking absolutely flummoxed, saying, I just can't believe it. And Sarah says, no matter what you've done, you're still my sister, and I'll stand by you. And Joe says, everybody knows you didn't mean to kill the old boot, God rest her soul. Now, of course, poor Mary is defending herself that she didn't kill her. It was like a pure coincidence. But y'all, I won't lie to you. If this happened in front of me, 100% I'm believing that bitch killed her. Like, there's no way I see that happen in front of my own eyes and I'm able to just shrug that shit off and just say it was a coincidence. I'm not going to be able to do it. As much as I logically know that that is likely true, I could not let it go. This would 100% forever be like, I think I met a witch one time. My story. Like somebody who she had powers, she didn't know it. And she wielded them a little irresponsibly because she didn't know it. But yeah, she definitely killed the lady who insulted her hat. Like, I couldn't help it. There's just, how do you see this happen and not just go with it? That's like some kind of power that she has. I mean, it's too good. Yeah, it was just a very tragic. And then Joe interrupts, my mother had the gift too. By God, that woman could make her enemies drop like flies. And he says it with this like really affectionate, nostalgic smile on his face. And it is the best. And Mary, going on insisting that she doesn't have any sort of abilities. And at this point, the girls show up and they have done all of the dishes. And I'll just grab the Hoover and I'll give the stairs a bit of a going over. And Orla says, and maybe I'll do a bit of dusting. And Mary's like, what the fuck is going on here? And it becomes very clear that the two of them have grown a little bit afraid of Mary. And that maybe they should do a little bit more around the house in case, she's getting a little bit overwrought here with all the work that she has to do. So, yeah, she's supposed to go to the wake for this woman, but she feels really weird about it because she knows everybody is going to fucking think that she's the one who killed her. And Joe advises her to just be really calm and not to rise to the bait if anybody starts to get mad about things or suggest things, because the last thing we want is another dead body on our hands here. And Mary says, I'll do my best, and I'm really kind of like, I would be a little bit afraid of that myself. Like, you clearly did something, Mary. So, yeah, be careful with that. Just, So they show up to the wake. Sarah in this, low cut, off the shoulder, black gown with her friggin', crucifix choker. It's, really so inappropriate. And of course, Mary is done up to in a literal turtleneck under a sweater. I mean, a whole other look. And they get greeted at the door by Eamon, who assures Mary that he looked into it and the cause of his mother's death was totally natural and that he does not believe that there was any sort of curse. And later on, come to find out that he 100% believes that there was a curse. But he just was telling Mary that, she was so intimidating to him that he was never going to blame her in front of everybody, at least, because he's not an idiot, which fair enough. I'm not mad at you for that, my boy. I can't even be mad. So Jerry gets brought. I always have to do that with him. He goes over to the kitchen and he's got some food with him that he brought for the wake. And there are these women in there who are all cooking and wearing these wonderful old-fashioned floral wrap smock sort of aprons. I have one of these and it used to be my great grandmother's. It's one of the only things I have of hers. And I loved seeing these in this episode. There are things like that that just make me good, all warm inside. The only thing about these aprons is that a lot of them didn't have pockets, and the one that I have doesn't have pockets, and it's just such an oversight to me. But yeah, he comes in and he's like, should I just leave these here? And it's clear that he's intending to drop stuff off and walk out again. And he runs into Sister Michael and is informed that everybody knows his wife killed this woman with some kind of curse. And she asks him, you're not one of those tongue people, are you? And I had no idea what she was talking about until it turns out what she's saying is that it's her turn to serve the communion wafers this week, and that she finds it super gross that she has to lay the wafer on somebody's tongue. And she's like, you can't just lift a wafer to your own mouth. You need me to do it for you. And I have always felt this way. Y'all, communion is bonkers. First of all, any sort of religious ritual like this always strikes me as weird. But communion specifically to me is so bonkers because it is just so deeply pagan. And the fact that it's treated as this Christian thing when those same people try and shun all kinds of other pagan rituals and whatnot. But this is something that they embrace when it's literally supposed to be eating the body and blood of your God. I mean, it doesn't get more pagan than that. It just doesn't, but it's fine. But then the way that it goes down, my dad's church, weirdly, they did this, but it was broken up pieces of saltine cracker and grape juice. And the when I found out, because what they did at my dad's church was they handed around that little tray that was filled with the crackers, and you would take one and hand it over, and then somebody would walk around with a tray full of the little cups of grape juice, and you would take one of those, and then they would move on, and you would wait until the prayer was said, and then you would eat your cracker, and you would drink your grape juice, and that was the ritual. The first time that I went to a proper Catholic, mass, and I had to kneel and stick my tongue out, I couldn't believe it. I honestly thought that maybe they were fucking with me until I looked down the row and saw, sure enough, you just open your mouth and stick your tongue out, and then they'll put it in your mouth for you, which I thought was insanity. I could not wrap my head around the fact that this is the way we were doing this. And then when it turns out that they tip wine into your mouth also, you don't even get the cup. That's not always true. Sometimes they will hand you the cup and you take a sip from it. But there are plenty of churches in which they also tip the cup and just give you a drop. And that's, the whole thing. It's just, it is a weird thing, and somebody like Sister Michael hating it makes 100% sense to me. Father Thomas usually deals with the wakes, but he's very sick at the moment, bedridden, in fact. And he says, God, what caused it? And she says, Jack Daniels, mostly. And he just nods. So this old lady comes up to him, and she takes the food from him, and then she informs him, I need 6 rounds of cheese and ham, 4 rounds of eggs and cress, 3 rounds of tuna. Cut the cheese and ham in triangles, the egg and cress in rectangles, and the tuna, well, you can freestyle. And he gets suckered into this thing where he's suddenly the sandwich guy. Now, I loved this detail because she says, 2 rounds of such and such. There was a question on one of my favorite podcasts, which is The Complete Guide to Everything. It's weird that it's one of my favorite podcasts because it's 2 straight white dudes talking about stuff, which you'd think I'd hate, but they are hilarious. They are asked a question by somebody who is, I think, American and has a British roommate, I think. And she's annoyed at the fact that when her friend asks her if she wants a sandwich, she says yes, and then she says, well, I'll make a round of sandwiches. And it turns out a round of sandwiches just means what Americans would call one sandwich cut into 2 or 4 pieces. And that she finds it very misleading when it said, I'll make a round of sandwiches, that it sounds like it's going to be a lot more food than it actually is. And she was asking their advice because they have a segment that's an advice column sort of style thing. And they were actually doing a live show, and she was there with her roommate, and she was like, tell us which one of us is right so that we can stop this madness forever. And I did not realize that this was a thing that so when this old lady is directing him saying, I need 4 rounds of such and such, I'm assuming that means 8 pieces of bread total, 4 whole sandwiches cut into 4s, right? That means 4 rounds, I'm guessing. But I got rather excited about this because I had heard that that argument, and I was just yeah, a round of sandwiches should definitely be more than just 1 sandwich cut in parts. And then when I heard this, I was like, oh, okay, this is just a thing. So meanwhile, he gets out of control. He turns into fucking Gordon Ramsay in the kitchen over some sandwiches. But Aaron is in the room with the body, and they are all talking over the fact, because Aaron tries to say, I'm glad to have some support at this very difficult time. And everybody's like, Aaron, you thought this woman was a horrible person. Why are you trying to act like you're so torn up over this? And James has never seen a dead body. And he is extremely weirded out over the fact that they are all just standing here casually around this corpse in a casket talking like there's no fucking corpse in a casket right there in the middle of the room. Meanwhile, everybody else is just like, what is wrong with you? It's a wake, of course. And Aaron says, haven't you ever seen a dead body before? And he says, of course not. And Michelle says, Christ, but the English are weird. Now, when was y'all's first time seeing a dead body? Because I'm trying to even think when the first time I saw one was. I was probably like late teens. And it's a weird thing because the way that we handle bodies, they don't even really look dead. So it made no impression. It was just, it wasn't even like unnerving to me or anything. It was just kind of like, it's more unnerving to me how little this seems like a person anymore. The spark that makes a person is so clearly absent from the body that it really transformed it into some object. It was so weird. But I can understand so many people not really like having a moment in their lives where they encounter a body like this. So James's reaction is sort of understandable. And Orla says you can touch her if you want and starts to like rub her face. And he says, why the hell would I want to touch her? And is so horrified by it. Oh my God. Claire, meanwhile, you shouldn't be afraid of a dead body. We'll all be one day. And here comes Michelle. It really makes you think, right? Just makes you want to, do everything and try everything. And Claire immediately is like, fuck, what did you do, Michelle? And she pulls out a giant Tupperware full of scones that she made that are apparently spiked with weed and tosses them into the coffin onto the body, I may add, which even I was just like, are you really doing this, lady? What? So what winds up happening is they're so busy standing there chit-chatting that an old lady from the kitchen swoops in and takes the fucking scones and walks away with them to bring them to the kitchen. And they are not able to do a damn thing to stop her. And all of them are standing there like, holy shit, are you kidding me? We just mixed those in with like the general population. Meanwhile, Jerry's in the kitchen just frantically making sandwiches. Guys, I love this so much. The quiche isn't cooked yet. We need this, we need that. And he just says, sweet suffering Jesus. Guys, can I tell y'all something? As much as I find it unfair that Jerry's the one that gets put in this position, I do love a dude who's not generally the one needing to host, getting to experience what this is like. Now, I would like to preface this by saying the parties that I throw, I tend to have things done mostly by the time the guests get there, or at least I'm finishing up by the time the guests get there, and I don't need to be making food while they're there. But this feels a little bit more like a restaurant, like a kitchen experience anyway, because of how it's like he's behind the scenes and not like doing his FaceTime with the guests. Nevertheless, this is something that is so frequently a woman's role. I mean, the kitchen's full of women, and getting to see a dude understand how much work goes into this. Jerry's a hardworking guy. I don't even feel like he's somebody who generally doesn't understand, but I love seeing him get the pressure put on, and seeing him struggling to keep up, because like cooking for crowds of people, even when it is just sandwiches, is no fucking joke. It is serious, and it takes like a lot of forethought and planning, and it's just, even though it was a silly thing, I just loved this underlining everything. So then we go to Colm, who's telling the story in exactly the same words as he was earlier in the episode to Sister Michael. Colm, this is no day for ado. And she's sort of staring around the room as he's talking. And she says, what's happening? And he says, for when the bride arrived, and as I say, by this stage, the wind was fierce. And she's going, am I dead? And he says, I've never heard wind like it. Is this my wake? Howling like a banshee it was. Am I in hell? So, the poor girl, the bride now, this is. She arrives anyway, and isn't she no sooner out of the car than she's lifted up in the air like a paper doll and blown into a flower bed. And she sits there for a minute as it registers and then starts to smile and says, that's actually quite funny. And guys, I can't tell you how hard I laughed. This scene is everything to me. I love it so much. It's such a perfect payoff for this dude, Colm, who's constantly talking about the most boring shit. For him to have been cut off in the middle of what seemed like another boring-ass story at the beginning of this episode, and then way down the road, and by way down the road, I mean from episode, 3 of season 1, where we first met him, we have never seen him say shit interesting. Not one time. So this payoff has been ages in the making, it feels like. And they set it up at the beginning of this very first episode, but you don't know it's a setup because it just feels like the fucking thing that he's always doing because he's like this. And so then to have it turn out to be really genuinely funny. The wind was so strong, the bride got lifted off her feet and thrown into a flower bed. That's hilarious. And the fact that he says it in such a fucking way as to almost completely undercut the actual humor of it. Like, he says it in such a way like, oh, isn't it a shame that that little tripod with the camera on it got knocked over? But he's talking about the fucking bride. So the whole delivery of it and the fact that she's so distracted thinking to herself, like, why the fuck am I here? That she nearly misses the actual story, which is so funny because she's so bored at the outset and how it sneaks up on her. And she's suddenly sitting there like sort of smirking like, oh my God, I love it. I love it. It was just so well done. I love shit that takes this long to pay off. And when it does, it's just a tiny little like moment, a nugget that you could like almost miss. Like, it would be very easy as a viewer to get so wrapped up in laughing at Sister Michael talking to herself that you almost miss what it is that Colm even says yourself. I mean, she nearly misses it. So I don't know. I just love this scene so much. I thought it was so fucking funny, and it just grew my affection for Sister Michael even further. I love her. So then we see this like sequence of everybody having to get the scones back. And they do manage to take a lot of them back. But they don't realize here that Joe, Grandpa Joe, as he is known, has eaten one already. And the only giveaway later is the fact that he's nice to Jerry and tells him, I think you're doing a fine job. Keep it up. And that really, for everyone, is the most alarming thing. It's so good. The way that he walks in to Jerry yelling at everybody. He walks up to him, claps him on the shoulder. And that, as he starts laughing and says, you're doing a fine job. Erin behind him, her eyes get huge. And the look that Jerry gets on his face as he's like given praise, probably for the first time ever, from Joe. It's so good, y'all. I love it so much. Later on, when Erin is trying to explain to all of them that these scones are fucking people up, everybody's like, you are overreacting, until she says Grandpa was nice to Dad. And then they're all like, fuck! Oh, God. Meanwhile, In the viewing room, here come Sarah and Mary realizing that Auntie Bridie is wearing their mother's earrings. And she had been trying to be like, maybe she wasn't really that bad, yada, yada, yada. And then she notices this and she's like, this fucking bitch is about to be buried in my mother's fucking earrings. Fuck this cunt. I'm taking this shit back. And she can go burn in hell for trying to steal them. Like, it's an amazing about face. So they're trying to take them off when her son, Eamon, comes into the room and he can see that there's something going on and is just like, let me see what's in your hand. She's like, what? In my hand? What do you even mean? Yeah, sure, I'll show you my hand. And she opens up her other hand and he's like, your other hand. And when he realizes that she's got the earrings, he's just like, are you fucking kidding me? Did you steal my dead mother's earrings? And she tries to be like, they were our mother's originally. But he isn't hearing it. And he's just yelling like, what is wrong with you? For God's sake, Mary, first the curse, now this. You said there was no curse. I didn't want to make you angry. I'm about to bury my mother. A hex is the last thing I need. So they're in the middle of this when Sarah notices something dripping from the ceiling. This is a result of the kids upstairs all trying to flush the weed scones down the toilet and overclogging that toilet. And it overflows. And when they go upstairs to check on them all, it's so gross, y'all. When they go upstairs to check on them all, I mean, there is so much water on the floor. It is so, so gross. It's like sloshing around. There was like a bit of a step down into the bathroom, and that's the only reason it's not like pouring out into the hallway. And Eamon says, my mother was right about you people. Wild animals would have more manners. And Orla tries to be like, well, we would have used a plunger, but we didn't have one. And I just like the whole thing, guys. It's so awful. So we cut to the family in the kitchen. And I love that Sarah is just like, I really wish that we had gotten those earrings. And is talking about maybe digging her up to get them. That's not a terrible idea. I just want to forget the whole thing, says Mary. And it turns out what Aaron told them was that she had the shits. They call it the scoots. And that she wanted all of her friends there for moral support. Which, I mean, they've got to know is not... But there's like no other reasonable explanation. I panicked, Daddy. Can we please stop talking about Aaron's scoots? We're about to have our tea. So then Joe comes over to the table and he's like, so I had one of these scones earlier and I never tasted anything like him. So I bagged us a couple, and he puts them down and everybody's like, oh, lovely. And Erin is sitting there watching every single person in her family take one of these scones with this look of absolute pure panic on her face. It's a real, almost like Twilight Zone moment of her sitting there looking like, oh my God, did I die? Is this my wake? What's happening? Like, it feels like that moment in a movie where you've been like in Nightmare on Elm Street, where at the end she thinks that she's woken up, but it turns out that it's yet another dream. That's the look that Erin has on her face right now. And I really just want Erin to also eat one and get to experience this with her whole rest of her family also high. This will be a memory that she will treasure for the rest of her days. But yeah, it is pretty awful. And I have no idea whether to expect there to be any fallout from this later in an episode, because these all seem to be pretty good standalones. Like there's very little that transfers from one episode to another, but I'm curious. Melanie says, I loved that scene too between Sister Michael and Colm. It's the best, right? So good, Mel. All right. So I think that's everything, but the show is so funny. I can't believe that this show is less than half an hour long, and yet I'm always able to talk about it for an hour. No problem. So good. Thank you again very, very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. God, this show is so good. I'm so sad because we've only got 2 episodes left in this season, I think, right? Tragic. And then another year up before it comes back. All right, guys. Well, thank you all again so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. And I will be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. So until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.